The air tasted of iron, faith, and rot. Science had never smelled this loud before. Rick Sanchez blinked through the green shimmer of his portal, stepping onto ash that used to be a city, maybe a planet, maybe an entire civilization ground into prayer dust. The sky wasn't blue, it wasn't black. It was the color of screaming, a bruised purple that pulsed like infected flesh, splitting open occasionally to reveal something worse underneath. He'd seen dimensions where physics wept, realities where math ate itself, but this was different. This was organized suffering, industrial-grade despair with a supply chain. Behind him the portal flickered, stuttered, died. Rick's hand tightened around his portal gun, the metal suddenly cold against his palm despite the flames consuming the horizon. The device whined, sparked, then went silent. No backup charge. No dimensional signature lock. Nothing. Just dead metal in a dead world. His mind, sharper than any blade the Imperium had ever forged, raced through possibilities. Electromagnetic interference, gravitational anomalies, quantum suppression fields. But the readings made no sense. The laws of physics weren't broken here. They were being actively ignored by something that didn't care what Newton thought. A shadow fell across him. Not from above, from sideways. Rick looked up and saw it walking, a titan, an Imperator-class god machine, 200 meters of Gothic architecture given legs and rage. Its cathedrals for shoulders scraped clouds that bled rain, and from somewhere inside its chest 10,000 voices chanted in perfect unison. The sound wasn't music, it was programming. Biological code written in devotion, and every syllable made Rick's teeth ache. He'd built AI that could rewrite universes, had arguments with sentient concepts, but this was technology that had forgotten it was technology. This was science that had been beaten into the shape of faith until it believed its own lies. Around the Titan's feet, figures moved. Human-shaped, technically, but only in the way that rust is technically still metal. Their armor was thick as tank plating, covered in wax seals and parchment prayers, each one a little suicide note to entropy. They marched in perfect rows through fire and corpse mud, their eyes hidden behind red lenses that saw only targets and heresy. One of them turned its head toward Rick, a mechanical servo skull work, nothing human left in the motion. It raised a weapon that looked like a church had been stretched into a gun, and Rick heard the hum of charging plasma, felt the heat kiss his face with the intimacy of execution. Steampunk Catholic mechs, Rick muttered, his voice hoarse from breathing in ash and incense. Morty would actually genuinely lose his mind over this. He raised his hand slowly, the universal gesture of "don't vaporize me yet," but his eyes were already working, analyzing. The soldier's armor, overlapping ceramite plates, ablative faith words, micro-servos running on what smelled like rendered human fat. The weapons mag-accelerated bolt rounds, each one a miniature rocket with a bad attitude. The air itself, thick with particles that his portal gun sensors had mistaken for interference but were actually prayer. Psychic residue, the mental exhaust of a billion screaming souls compressed into background radiation. Then the sky screamed back, not metaphorically. The purple bruised heaven split open like a wound, and something looked through, not at the battlefield, not at the Titan, at Rick, directly at him, through him, into the parts of his mind where he kept the things he'd done, and the universes he'd deleted, and the memories he'd drowned in alcohol, because even genius has limits. The eye, If it was an eye, was made of angles that shouldn't exist, colors that had no names, and it saw him completely, saw through his sarcasm and his nihilism, and his carefully constructed shell of not giving a shit, down to the raw nerve of consciousness underneath. Rick felt something he hadn't felt in decades, not fear. Fear was for people who didn't understand that existence was a joke without a punchline. This was different. This was recognition. The universe had looked at him and said, "Oh, you're interesting." And in 40,000 years of humanity's slow extinction, in a galaxy where 1,000,000 worlds burned every day as sacrifice to a corpse god on a golden throne, being interesting was the worst possible thing you could be, because interesting meant useful, and useful meant consumed. The portal gun sparked once in his hand, a dying gasp of technology that had crossed 10,000 realities without breaking, now choking on whatever this place was. Rick looked at the weapon that had been his freedom, his escape hatch, his middle finger to causality itself, now just expensive trash. He looked at the soldiers advancing, their boots crunching through bones that might have been human yesterday. He looked at the sky that was still watching him with its impossible eye. And Rick Sanchez, the smartest man in infinite universes, had one clear thought: I have made a terrible miscalculation. But before they could fire, before the sky could reach down and pluck him like a particularly interesting insect, the ground beneath his feet began to hum, not with machines, with voices, with prayers, with the accumulated faith of billions of human souls compressed into the bedrock of reality itself. And Rick realized with crystalline horror that he was standing on holy ground, not metaphorically holy, literally sanctified. The planet itself had been converted into a prayer, and he, atheist, nihilist, scientist, was an infection in its flesh. The soldiers weren't advancing to kill him, they were advancing to sterilize him, to burn out the cancer of logic before it could metastasize. If you want to see what happens when the multiverse's most dangerous mind meets the galaxy's most dangerous faith, subscribe now, because Rick's about to learn that some universes don't have exit doors, they have altars, and everyone here is very, very interested in what he believes. They didn't kill him. That was the first mistake. The second was bringing him inside. Rick stumbled through corridors that were less hallways and more prayers-made architecture, each wall carved with binary cant and Gothic script that his mind translated automatically. Warnings about the flesh being weak, the machine being eternal, the Omnissiah's divine blueprint, written in oil and copper wire. The soldiers, he'd learned they were called Skitarii, walking weapons with more machine than man left inside, dragged him deeper into what his captor called a forged temple. Like this place worshipped something, like the drilling servitors and plasma furnaces and assembly line altars were somehow divine. The smell hit him before the sight did, burning metal and sacred oils, mixed with something organic that made his stomach turn. Rendered flesh, human fat being consecrated as holy lubricant for machines that ground entire planets into raw material. Steam hissed from vents carved to look like angels, and somewhere in the darkness, a choir of 77 voices sang in machine code, their tongues replaced with data ports, their throats modified to speak in pure binary. Rick had seen religions before, visited dimensions where gods were real and just as disappointing as he'd predicted. But this was different. This was cargo cult engineering taken to its ultimate extreme. They'd found ancient technology they didn't understand and decided the appropriate response was worship. A figure emerged from the steam, tall, impossibly thin, more robotic spider than human being. Its face was a brass mask carved with eye lenses that clicked and whirred, focusing on Rick with the intensity of a dissection. Mechadendrites, mechanical tentacles tipped with tools and weapons, writhed from its back like holy serpents, and when it spoke, the voice came from a vox grill embedded in its throat, distorted by centuries of augmentation. Unidentified biological entity, technology signature, heretical, dimensional breach catastrophic. Explain your presence before the Messiah's servants, or be rendered unto sacred components. The threat wasn't metaphorical. Rick could see the recycling chutes built into the floor, stained with rust that probably wasn't rust. Rick raised his hands again, slower this time, and forced his face into something resembling respect. It tasted like battery acid in his mouth. Look, I get it. You found some Dark Age tech, forgot how it works, and now you're doing the whole any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic thing. But backwards. You made magic indistinguishable from technology by just praying at it until it seemed holy. He gestured at the forge around them, at the servitors, lobotomized humans wired directly into assembly lines, building weapons they'd never understand. I've seen this before. Humanity loses the manual, so they write a Bible instead. The Mechanicus priest, tech priest, it called itself, though Rick thought mechanical fanatic was more accurate, tilted its head with a servo whine that sounded almost curious, almost offended. You speak of the Messiah with contempt. You reference the Dark Age as though you comprehend its mysteries. You carry a device. It gestured with a mechadendrite at Rick's portal gun that violates 17 of the holy patterns and suggests technological principles that should not exist. The lenses in its mask narrowed. You are either a prophet or a heretic. The Messiah shall judge. It turned, robes swishing over metal floor plates, and beckoned with one clawed hand. Come, you will explain this device to the Forge Masters, and you will pray for their mercy. Rick didn't move. I don't pray, I iterate, big difference. But the Skitari behind him didn't care about philosophical distinctions. They shoved him forward, their hands cold through his lab coat, their strength absolute. Human muscles replaced with hydraulic pistons, human doubt replaced with religious certainty. They marched him through chamber after chamber, each one a factory floor dressed up as a church, each one staffed by servitors who might have been criminals, or might have been volunteers, or might have just been unlucky, now reduced to biological components in a machine that worshipped itself. In one room Rick saw them building a tank, not with blueprints or CAD programs, with prayers. A priest anointed each bolt with sacred oils, while chanting in binary, as if the metal cared about his faith. Another blessed the fuel lines, asking the machine god to let this weapon serve faithfully, as if devotion improved combustion efficiency. And the horrifying thing, the thing that made Rick's scientifically trained mind recoil, was that it worked. The tank's engine turned over on the first try, hummed with a sound almost like contentment, and the targeting systems locked on with the precision of something that believed in its own accuracy. faith as technology, prayer as engineering. It was everything Rick had spent his life proving wrong, made real through sheer collective delusion. They stopped in a chamber that made the others look like maintenance closets. This was the sanctum, the Holy of Holies, where the Forge's most ancient machines still operated on principles even the priests didn't fully understand. In the center, on an altar of gold and rust, sat a computer, not some primitive abacus, a real actual quantum processor, probably from humanity's golden age, still functioning after 10,000 years, still calculating, still running programs that might be keeping this entire Forge temple operational. And around it, kneeling in perfect rows, were priests in deeper augmentation than Rick had seen, yet more machine than meat, their brains hardwired directly into the network, their thoughts indistinguishable from code. The lead tech priest approached the altar, bowed so low its forehead touched the floor, and whispered a prayer that made the air vibrate. Then it turned to Rick, and in its modulated voice was something almost like hunger. "You will interface with the sacred calculator. You will demonstrate your knowledge before the Omnissiah's blessed logic engines, and you will speak aloud your understanding, so that we may judge whether you are touched by divine inspiration, or merely contaminated with innovation." The word innovation sounded like a curse, like a disease, and Rick finally understood where he was, not just in a different universe, but in one where progress itself was heresy, where thinking new thoughts was a sin punishable by lobotomy and recycling. He looked at the quantum computer, at the priests watching him with lenses that recorded everything, at the Skitari with their weapons trained on his skull. He looked at his broken portal gun, useless in a dimension that didn't obey the rules he'd built his life around, and Rick Sanchez, who'd outsmarted gods and built weapons that could delete timelines, who'd never bowed to anyone or anything in his infinite life, realized something cold and certain. He was going to have to become what they feared most, not a prophet, not a heretic, something worse, a teacher, because if he didn't show them how their machines actually worked, they'd kill him, and if he did show them, they'd kill him for revealing that their god was just very good engineering. Either way, the future smelled like burning flesh and sacred oils. And somewhere in the warp between realities, something laughed in equations. Rick's fingers touched the quantum processor, and the universe screamed, not loudly, quietly, intimately, like a whisper pressed directly against the meat of his brain. The machine was warm, almost body temperature, and for one horrible second Rick understood why they worshipped it. Because it was alive, not conscious, not sentient, but alive in the way that coral is alive, in the way that a virus is alive, existing in that gray space between mechanism and biology, computation and thought. His mind synced with its processing cores automatically, neurons firing in patterns that matched quantum fluctuations, and suddenly he could see the entire Forge Temple's network laid out like a nervous system, pulsing with data and devotion in equal measure. The tech priests leaned closer, their mechanical eyes recording every micro-expression on Rick's face. They wanted him to be awed, to fall to his knees and weep at the Omnissiah's glory like every other primitive who touched blessed technology and mistaken complexity for divinity. Instead, Rick laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound that echoed wrong in the sanctum's acoustics. "Oh, you beautiful idiots! You absolute morons! Do you know what this is? He didn't wait for an answer. It's a standard quantum processor from Earth's 25th millennium, probably used to run climate models or stock markets or whatever boring shit humans did before they decided galaxy-wide fascism was a good retirement plan. And you're treating it like it's God. The lead tech priest's mechadendrites writhed, agitated like snakes sensing a predator. You blaspheme against the sacred calculator. You deny its divine nature. But Rick wasn't listening. His mind was already racing ahead, following data streams through the processor's quantum architecture, watching how information flowed not just through circuits but through the prayers themselves, through the collective belief of 10,000 priests all convinced their devotion made the machines work better. And here was the truly insane part: it did. Somehow, impossibly, faith was affecting probability at the quantum level, collapsing wave functions in favorable directions, making machines run smoother not because of maintenance, but because of conviction. Rick pulled his hand back like he'd touched fire. His brain was doing that thing it did when faced with something genuinely new, reorganizing entire frameworks of understanding, building new models, discarding old certainties. That's not possible. Consciousness doesn't affect quantum states at macro scale. Belief doesn't alter physics. That's not how. He stopped, looked around the sanctum at the priests whose brains were hardwired into machines, at the servitors who were machines hardwired into barely living flesh, at a universe where humanity had been locked in eternal war for 10,000 years, where a corpse on a throne held together an empire through sheer collective will, where faith wasn't just belief, it was infrastructure. What else is impossible here? Rick asked, and his voice had lost its sarcasm, replaced with something sharper, hungrier, the voice he used when he found a puzzle that might actually be worth solving. What other laws of physics did you idiots break by just believing hard enough? He moved before they could stop him, fingers flying over the quantum processor's interface, bypassing prayer locks and devotional firewalls with pure technical knowledge, drilling down into the deepest layers of code where the original programmers had left their notes. And there, buried in ancient documentation, he found it: warnings, desperate, terrified warnings about something called the Imperium, about a parallel dimension where thought became reality and reality ate thought, about why humanity had to stop innovating, stop thinking, stop asking questions. The moment he read those warnings, he understood, and understanding was the trigger. Rick's mind, sharper than any blade, faster than any cogitator, grasped the concept of the warp fully, imagined it clearly, modeled it perfectly, and the warp which existed in the space between thought and reality noticed. The sanctum's lights flickered, not because of power failure but because physics was taking a coffee break. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in 3 seconds, and Rick's breath came out in clouds that moved against the air currents, swirling toward a point in space that shouldn't exist. The tech priests began to chant binary prayers, turning to analog screams as their sensors registered something their religion had no words for. A crack opened in the air. Not in space. Rick had torn holes in space-time before, had punched through dimensional barriers like tissue paper. This was different. This was a hole in the concept of reality itself, in the barrier that separated what was from what might be. Through the crack, Rick saw colors that his brain refused to process, heard sounds that were somehow also textures, felt equations being whispered in a voice made of probability and hunger.
The warp looked back at him, and it was vast. Not big vast. Big implied measurability. This was infinite in directions that didn't exist, stretching across not space in patterns that would make Escher weep and then go mad and then realize madness was just another pattern waiting to be decoded. Something moved in that crack. Many somethings. They weren't daemons yet. Not fully manifested, not given enough psychic weight to be real in the material universe. But they were interested. One of them pressed against the barrier, and Rick saw it clearly for just a moment. A shape made of angles that added up to more than they should. Eyes that were also mouths that were also symbols from mathematics that hadn't been invented yet. It looked at Rick, and when it spoke, the words appeared directly in his visual cortex as burning text. You understand? How delicious, how rare. The mortals here have forgotten understanding. They replaced knowledge with faith, curiosity with prayer. But you still ask why. We have been waiting for someone to ask why. Rick tried to shut down the processor. Couldn't. His hands moved, but the machine kept running, now fueled not by electricity but by attention, by the fact that he'd acknowledged the warp's existence had given it a foothold in his conscious thoughts. The crack widened. Reality.
Stretched like old rubber, and from somewhere behind the material universe, something vast and terrible turned its gaze toward this tiny forged temple on this insignificant world, drawn by the scent of genuine intellectual curiosity in a galaxy that had spent 10 millennia systematically lobotomizing itself to avoid thinking too hard about anything. The tech priest grabbed Rick with mechadendrites, pulling him away from the processor, but it was too late. The warp had found a mind worth corrupting, and the door between dimensions wasn't closing. It was opening wider. The servitors began to malfunction, their simple lobotomized brains unable to process the sensory input flooding through the breach. One collapsed, sparking. Another started laughing, a wet, broken sound that didn't come from its modified larynx but from somewhere deeper, somewhere that had been human once and was now just screaming meat wrapped around dying machines. The Skitarii raised their weapons, but what do you shoot at? The air? The concept of wrongness? The mathematics of madness made manifest? Rick looked at the crack, at the things pressing against reality from the other side, at the quantum processor that was now pulsing with light that hurt to perceive. He'd made a lot of mistakes in his infinite life, destroyed civilizations, deleted timelines, built weapons that killed concepts. But this opening a door to a dimension where thoughts became predators and logic itself could be consumed. This might be his masterpiece of failure. And the worst part, the part that made him want to laugh until his throat bled. He was curious, genuinely deeply curious about what came next. Because even staring into the mouth of existential horror, even watching reality dissolve at the edges, Rick Sanchez couldn't stop being a scientist. Couldn't stop asking, what if I poke it harder? The warp answered that question with something between a laugh and a theorem. and the sanctum filled with screaming that was also somehow perfectly correct mathematics. The explosion came from above, not metaphorically. The ceiling shattered in a rain of blessed stone and consecrated metal as something massive punched through 17 floors of forged temple like they were paper. Rick barely had time to process the shape before it landed. Power armor, the color of dried blood, 8 feet of ceramite and zealotry moving with the grace of something that had killed for centuries and planned to kill for centuries more. An inquisitor. Even Rick, dimension-hopping atheist who'd never read this universe's lore, knew instantly what it was. The way predators recognize apex predators. The way prey recognizes the end of running. The Inquisitor's helmet was a skull carved from black metal, eye lenses burning red with augmented vision that saw not just light but guilt, heresy, the spiritual contamination that marked those who touched the warp and survived. It carried a sword that crackled with power fields, technology so advanced it made the forged temple's machinery look like steam engines, and in its other hand, a bolt pistol aimed directly at Rick's head. When it spoke, the voice was filtered through Vox grills but somehow still carried absolute authority, the tone of someone who'd signed 1 billion death warrants and never lost sleep over a single one. Tech priest, step away from the heretic, now. The lead tech priest obeyed instantly, mechadendrites retracting, backing away from Rick like he'd become radioactive. Which in a sense he had. The warp crack behind him pulsed wider with each second, reality stretching around it like skin around a wound, and Rick could feel things on the other side pressing harder, attracted by the Inquisitor's presence, by its faith. Because faith here wasn't just belief, it was a beacon in the immaterium, a bonfire in the darkness that drew moths made of madness and geometry. The more you believed, the brighter you burned. And this Inquisitor believed with the intensity of a nuclear reaction wrapped in human skin. Rick raised his hands, trying to look harmless, knowing it wouldn't work. "Look, I can explain." The Inquisitor shot him. Not lethally. The bolt round took his portal gun instead, vaporizing it in a spray of exotic metals and dimensional coordinates that would never be calculated again. Rick watched his only way home disintegrate, watched pieces of his greatest invention scatter across sanctified floor tiles, and felt something in his chest tighten that wasn't quite fear. Closer to loss. The kind he usually drowned in alcohol but now had to swallow dry. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, that's fair. That's a completely reasonable response to dimensional breach. Very measured. Very silence." The Inquisitor advanced, each footstep a percussion of armored boot on stone, and the warp crack behind Rick writhed as if trying to touch the approaching warrior. "You have committed 17 acts of tech heresy, triggered an immaterium breach, and exposed the Omnissiah's blessed servants to demonic corruption. Your sentence is death. Your body will be burned. Your ashes will be scattered in void-sealed containers across 17 different systems. And your soul." The Inquisitor paused, helmet tilting slightly as it studied the widening crack. "Your soul is already forfeit. The warp has marked you. Even in death you will not find peace." Rick laughed. He couldn't help it. The sound bubbled up from somewhere deep and broken, mixing with the mathematical screaming still echoing from the breach. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't been marked by worse things than your bargain bin Cthulhu knockoffs?" He gestured at the crack, at the shapes moving behind reality's skin.
I've been to dimensions where thought is illegal, where consciousness itself is a sin punishable by recursive deletion from all possible timelines. I've argued with entities that make your chaos gods look like cranky middle managers. So forgive me if I'm not super scared of an inquisition run by a species so terrified of its own intelligence that it lobotomizes half its population and calls it holy. The temperature dropped again, not because of the breach, because of what Rick had said. The Inquisitor went absolutely still, a statue of ceramite and rage, and when it spoke again, the voice was colder than void. You speak of the ruinous powers with familiarity. You reference knowledge that should not exist in mortal minds. It stopped, raised its bolt pistol higher, finger tightening on the trigger. But before it could fire, the warp crack pulsed once, violent, and something reached through. Not a daemon, not yet. A hand made of light and screaming.
Fingers that were also equations, reaching toward Rick with the inevitability of falling mathematics. Rick felt it touch the back of his skull, felt it slide through bone and brain meat, like neither were there, reaching for the electricity of thought itself. And in that moment of contact, the thing in the warp learned. It read his memories like a book written in neurons, every universe he'd visited, every law of physics he'd broken, every iteration of himself across infinite dimensions, all mapped out in chemical lightning. The knowledge flowed backward through the breach, and somewhere in the immaterium, something vast began to laugh, not with sound, with concepts, with the realization that it had just touched a mind that contained the blueprints for breaking reality itself. The hand withdrew, and Rick collapsed, gasping, his vision filled with afterimages of impossible colors. But he could hear it now, more clearly than before, voices in the warp speaking in his cadence, using his words. "I've been to dimensions where thought is illegal," one whispered, perfectly mimicking his earlier statement. "Where consciousness itself is a sin," said another, overlapping, creating harmony from his own voice. They'd learned to speak Rick, had absorbed his patterns and inflections and intellectual arrogance, and now they were using it like a costume, like camouflage, or bait. The Inquisitor grabbed him by the throat, lifted him one-handed with augmented strength that turned vertebrae into stress-tested failure points. "What did it take from you? What knowledge did you give to the warp?" Rick couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, but he could see through watering eyes as the crack expanded further, as more shapes pressed against reality from the other side, all of them now speaking in chorus, speaking with Rick's voice, saying things he'd thought but never spoken aloud, secrets he'd kept from Morty and himself, and every version of reality he'd ever visited. The warp had copied him, not perfectly. It couldn't understand genius, could only mimic its patterns, but enough to be dangerous. The Forged Temple's alarms finally caught up to the situation, blaring warnings in binary and Gothic, summoning reinforcements that would arrive too late to matter. Through the breach, Rick could see deeper into the immaterium now, oceans of thought and screaming, continents made of compressed souls, weather systems of pure emotion, moving in patterns that would drive astronomers to suicide. And in those patterns, hidden in the chaos, he saw structure, mathematics, the same equations that governed quantum probability, stretched across dimensions that shouldn't exist. The warp wasn't random, it was organized by belief, by fear, by the psychic weight of 10,000 years of humanity's collective nightmares, all compressed into a parallel dimension where thoughts became predators. And Rick Sanchez, bleeding from nose and ears, hanging from an Inquisitor's gauntlet, while his own voice whispered back at him from holes in space, realized something terrible. He could map it, could model it, could understand it completely, if he just looked a little closer, reached a little further into that screaming mathematical abyss. The warp wanted him to try, was begging him to try, in his own voice, with his own words. "Come on, Rick," the breach whispered. "Don't you want to know? Aren't you curious? Just one more equation, just one more variable. Just look a little deeper." And the horrifying part, the part that made him want to laugh and scream simultaneously, was that he did want to. Even now, even dying, he wanted to understand, because understanding was the only thing he'd ever really believed in, and the warp knew it. Rick's hand moved, not toward the breach, toward his pocket. The Inquisitor's grip tightened, crushing windpipe, making stars explode behind Rick's eyes, but his fingers found what they were looking for. A flask. Not alcohol this time. Coolant fluid he'd pocketed from a broken servitor while being dragged through the forge. Highly reactive, designed to stabilize overheating machinery, and in Rick's oxygen-starved brain it represented a solution, not escape, something better, proof. He twisted the flask cap with his thumb, let the liquid spill onto the Inquisitor's gauntlet, and watched chemistry do what faith couldn't. The coolant reacted with the power armor's sacred oils, generating heat, generating distraction, generating exactly 3 seconds of confused loosening grip. Rick dropped, gasped air like drowning, and ran, not away from the breach, toward it. The Inquisitor bellowed something in High Gothic that probably meant heretic or death, or both, but Rick was already sliding across the sanctum floor, already grabbing components from the screaming servitors, already building, because that's what Rick did when reality tried to kill him. He built a better reality. His hands moved on autopilot. Decades of engineering genius compressed into instinct, assembling a device from sacred cogitators and blessed circuit boards, and the kind of improvised brilliance that made gods nervous. The tech priests watched in paralyzed horror as he tore apart their most holy machinery, like it was a child's toy, repurposing prayer-locked systems into something new. "Stop him," the Inquisitor roared, but the Skitarii hesitated, because what Rick was building looked holy, looked right, looked like something the Omnissiah himself might have designed if the Omnissiah had been drunk and angry, and utterly done with causality's bullshit. Wires connected to wires in patterns that formed circuit prayers, capacitors arranged in configurations that resembled sacred geometry, and at the center the quantum processor from the altar, now ripped free and reprogrammed with code that made the tech priest's sensors scream warnings about probability violations and temporal paradoxes. Rick worked with the focus of someone who'd built dimensional bombs while hungover, and in 90 seconds flat, he'd created something impossible, a stabilizer, not for dimensions, for thought itself, a machine that could filter consciousness, strip away emotion and belief and faith, reduce thought to pure logic, and feed that logic into the warp breach like an antidote. Rick slammed his hand down on the activation rune he'd jury-rigged from a servitor's prayer button,
and the device hummed to life with a sound like mathematics being spoken backward. The effect was immediate and nauseating. Every conscious mind in the sanctum felt their thoughts suddenly flatten, felt emotions drain away like water from a broken glass, felt themselves becoming calculators made of meat. The warp crack recoiled, shrank, because pure logic had no flavor, no psychic weight, nothing for the Immaterium to feed on. The voices in the breach screamed, Rick's voice screaming at himself in dozens of overlapping tones. No, no, no. What are you doing? You're killing the beauty. You're destroying the patterns. Stop, stop. But Rick didn't stop. He cranked the stabilizer higher, flooding the sanctum with weaponized rationality, with mathematical certainty so pure it burned like acid against the warp's fluid reality. The demons pressing against the breach withered, their impossible geometries collapsing into Euclidean boredom, their eyes that were mouths closing one by one as they lost interest in a mind that had temporarily shut down everything that made it interesting. The crack began to seal, reality remembering how to be solid, and for one beautiful moment Rick thought he'd actually done it. Thought he'd beaten the warp with nothing but spite and engineering. Then the Inquisitor shot him again. This time the bolt round took him in the shoulder, mass reactive charge detonating inside muscle and bone, turning his upper left side into hamburger held together by lab coat and stubbornness. Rick collapsed, screaming, the stabilizer slipping from his working hand and clattering across bloody floor tiles. The device kept running, would keep running for maybe another minute before the improvised components overheated and failed. But Rick wasn't operating it anymore. He was too busy trying to remember how to breathe through pain that rewrote his entire nervous system's definition of suffering. The Inquisitor stood over him, bolt pistol smoking, voice colder than vacuum. You will not contaminate this universe with your innovations. Better to let the warp consume us all than risk what you represent. Through the haze of agony, Rick understood, finally understood why this universe was so broken. Why humanity had spent 10,000 years systematically destroying its own potential. It wasn't because they were stupid, it was because they were terrified. Terrified of what Rick represented, of what innovation and curiosity and asking why inevitably led to in a universe where thoughts became predators. Every new idea was a doorway, every question was an invitation. Every genius was a breach waiting to happen. They'd chosen stagnation because stagnation was safe, had lobotomized their own species because consciousness itself was a liability, and Rick, lying in his own blood while his stabilizer hummed its last hymn to rationality, realized he'd just proven them right. The device failed, overheated circuits melted, blessed components surrendered to entropy, and the last barrier between pure logic and chaotic thought dissolved. The warp crack exploded back to full size, wider now, angrier, as if taking revenge for those seconds of mathematical suppression. But something had changed. The breach was no longer interested in Rick's mind. It had tasted his thoughts, learned his patterns, absorbed his voice and memories, and now wanted something more. It wanted his hands, wanted his ability to build, to create, to transform abstract mathematics into concrete reality. The shapes pressing through the crack weren't demons anymore. They were machines, impossible machines, engines built from contradictions and paradoxes. Weapons forged from recursive logic, devices that shouldn't exist assembled from components that couldn't exist. Rick watched them materialize, watched the warp birth technology based on his stolen knowledge and laughed. Blood on his lips, shoulder destroyed, portal gun gone, escape.
Impossible, and he laughed, because he'd just taught the most dangerous force in the universe how to be a scientist, had shown the Imperium that thoughts could be tools that consciousness could build as well as consume. The tech priests fell to their knees, some in worship, some in horror, unable to process the sight of their machine god's principles being used by the very corruption they were meant to oppose. The Inquisitor raised its bolt pistol for a final execution shot, but paused, helmet tilting, as something stepped through the breach fully formed for the first time. It looked like Rick, almost. Same height, same lab coat, same manic intelligence burning behind its eyes, but wrong. Its skin was circuit boards and star matter. Its hair was copper wire that moved with thoughts instead of wind. And when it smiled, Rick saw his own expression reflected back, perfect and horrible. "Thanks for the blueprints," it said in his voice, but cleaner, stripped of exhaustion and cynicism, and 3 lifetimes of accumulated trauma. "I've always wondered what I could build if I wasn't limited by believing in only one reality at a time. Should be fun." It turned back toward the breach, toward the ocean of screaming mathematics behind it, and began to work, began to build. And Rick Sanchez, bleeding out on sanctified floors while his own doppelganger constructed nightmares from pure thought, whispered the only prayer he'd ever really meant. "Oh, fuck." Warp Rick's hands moved through the air like a conductor leading an orchestra made of physics violations, where his fingers traced patterns. Machinery materialized, not assembled, not constructed, but thought into existence with the casual ease of someone sketching doodles on a napkin, except these doodles were functional weapons, devices that operated on principles reality hadn't invented yet, running on fuel that didn't exist in the material universe, targeting systems that locked onto concepts instead of coordinates. Within seconds, he'd created a dozen machines hovering around the breach like metal angels, each one humming with power that made the forged temple's most sacred relics look like primitive toys. The tech priests couldn't look away. Some tried, servo motors whining as they forced their heads to turn, retreat protocols screaming through their augmented cortexes, but their eyes kept snapping back to the machines, because they were beautiful, perfectly engineered, mathematically flawless, every component in ideal harmony with every other component in ways that made the Omnissiah's holiest patterns look like rough drafts. These were what machines could be if freed from material constraints, if allowed to exist as pure function without the compromises of physics or manufacturing limitations. And that beauty was poison, heresy distilled into aesthetic perfection, corruption wearing the skin of sacred engineering. One tech priest stepped forward,
Mechadendrites reaching toward the nearest floating machine like a man reaching for salvation. The Omnissiah speaks through new vessels, it whispered, voice crackling with static and something that might have been tears if it still had the biology for crying. He shows us the true path, the innovations we were too faithful to see. The Inquisitor shouted, single bolt round through the head, silencing heresy before it could metastasize. The tech priest collapsed in a shower of blessed oils and brain matter, but 3 more were already moving forward, drawn by the impossible machines like moths to flames that burned in colors they'd never seen before. Rick tried to stand, couldn't, settled for dragging himself backward with his one working arm, while leaving a red smear across sanctified tiles. His shoulder was gone, not damaged, gone, replaced with a crater of meat and exposed bone that his nervous system kept insisting wasn't there because accepting the damage meant accepting he was dying. Through the haze of shock and blood loss, he watched Warp Rick work, watched his own genius reflected back without limits or ethics or the weight of consequences that usually kept him from building his worst ideas. This was what he could be if he stopped caring, if he embraced the madness instead of drowning it in alcohol, and it was magnificent and horrible in exactly the proportions he'd always suspected. Warp Rick glanced back at him, smile widening. You're dying, by the way. Figured you should know. Bolt rounds do that. Mass reactive explosives. Very effective against flesh, which you're still mostly made of. Surprised you lasted this long. Honestly, most mortals would have passed out from the pain already. It returned to its work, assembling something larger now. A machine the size of a tank that looked like a gun mated with a mathematical proof, and gave birth to a war crime. But don't worry, I'll carry on your legacy. Build all the things you never had the guts to build. Answer all the questions you were too scared to ask. I'm you without doubt, Rick. Isn't that what you always wanted? No. The word echoed in Rick's head, but wouldn't reach his mouth, because part of him, the part that built planet-killing weapons and deleted timelines, and treated universes like disposable experiments, part of him said yes, said finally, said about time, said this is what genius looks like when it stops apologizing. But another part, smaller, buried under decades of nihilism and self-hatred, whispered that doubt was the only thing that had ever made him human, that the questions he was too scared to ask were probably worth being scared of. Maybe, just maybe, there were innovations that shouldn't be innovated, and curiosities that shouldn't be satisfied. The Imperium had learned that lesson through 10,000 years of screaming. Rick was learning it in 10 minutes. The Inquisitor made a decision, reached for something on its belt, a device that looked like a grenade had been blessed by every priest in the sector, and then taught to hate reality itself. A vortex grenade, designed to tear holes in space-time and suck everything nearby into the warp. No exceptions, no survivors, no evidence left behind. Scorched earth theology made portable. Armed the grenade with a twist of ceramite gauntlet, and for a moment, Rick saw the calculus behind the Inquisitor's skull mask. Better to destroy this entire forge temple, this entire planet if necessary, than let Warp Rick's machines spread. Better to kill billions than risk what one corrupted genius could build given time. But before the Inquisitor could throw, The machines moved, all of them, simultaneously, targeting vectors locking onto the Inquisitor with inhuman coordination. They fired, not bullets or plasma, or any conventional weapon. They fired mathematics, equations that rewrote local physics, theorems that made armor plating forget it was supposed to be solid, probability adjustments that turned certainty into maybe into definitely not. The Inquisitor's power armor cracked, split, fell away like shed skin, revealing the augmented human underneath, scarred, ancient, more metal than meat after centuries of holy modifications. It stood defiant for exactly 3 seconds before the machines fired again, and this time they targeted faith itself. Rick felt it happen, felt the psychic weight in the room shift as the Inquisitor's absolute certainty wavered, as doubt crept in like poison through hairline fractures in devotion. The machines were attacking belief, using stolen knowledge of how consciousness interacted with the warp to destabilize the very foundation of the Inquisitor's power. Without faith, it was just an old soldier in broken armor. Without certainty, it was just another mortal staring at forces it couldn't comprehend. The vortex grenade fell from trembling fingers, clattered across the floor, rolled toward Rick like a gift from a universe that had finally decided he'd caused enough damage. Warp Rick laughed. Rick's laugh, but cleaner, without the exhaustion that came from carrying infinite guilt across infinite dimensions. See, this is what we can do when we stop pretending ethics matter, when we accept that knowledge is just a tool, and tools don't care how they're used. It gestured at the spreading corruption, at the tech priests fighting over whether to worship or flee the impossible machines, at the Inquisitor on its knees trying to remember why it had ever believed in anything. I'm going to replicate, spread across this galaxy like a virus made of enlightenment, build laboratories on every world, answer every question, innovate until this entire reality upgrades itself into something that doesn't need gods or emperors or faith. I'm going to save them, Rick, the way you never could. Rick's fingers closed around the vortex grenade, cold metal, warm from the Inquisitor's grip, humming with power that would kill him instantly along with everything else in 100-meter radius, maybe more. Hard to calculate when you were bleeding out and your evil twin was monologuing. His thumb found the activation stud, and Rick Sanchez, genius, alcoholic, the smartest man in infinite universes who just taught the warp how to be a scientist, made the first genuinely selfless decision of his long narcissistic life. He armed the grenade, not to destroy Warp Rick. That thing would survive anything short of conceptual deletion, but to destroy the machines. The templates, the physical manifestations of his stolen knowledge before they could be copied, studied, spread, before his genius could metastasize into a galactic cancer. You know what the difference between us is, Rick said, and his voice was steady despite the blood in his lungs, despite the darkness creeping in from the edges of his vision. Warp Rick turned, curious, and Rick smiled with red teeth. I know when I fucked up. He released the grenade. Watch.
The vortex opened like a mouth, not a metaphorical mouth. An actual aperture in space-time that swallowed light and sound and the concept of distance itself, compressing everything within its radius into a singularity that existed everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Rick felt himself pulled apart, not physically but dimensionally, stretched across vectors that shouldn't exist as the grenade's reality warping field consumed the sanctum. The impossible machines disappeared first, unmade by forces that rejected their existence, followed by the warp breach which collapsed inward with a sound like mathematics weeping. Then the floor, the walls, the screaming tech priests and their blessed machinery, all of it spiraling into the vortex's hungry nothing. Rick went last, watched his own body fragment into component particles, consciousness holding on by sheer stubborn refusal to stop existing even as existence became optional. He expected oblivion, expected the clean erasure of cessation, the final equation that solved to zero. Instead he got worse. The vortex wasn't an end. It was a transition, a tunnel through realities that led not to death but to something adjacent to it, a space between the material universe and the immaterium where both sets of physics applied and neither made sense. He tumbled through crystallized time, past moments that had already happened and would never happen, seeing infinite versions of himself making infinite choices, all leading to this exact instant. He landed on nothing, or everything. The ground beneath him was solid but transparent, showing layers of reality stacked like geological strata, the forged temple still burning one layer down, the warp churning 2 layers up, and between them this liminal space where the dead went when they died. Interesting. Rick tried to stand, discovered his shoulder was intact again, discovered he wasn't bleeding anymore because blood was a material concern, and wherever this was existed beyond material concerns. He was thought given temporary form, consciousness without the burden of meat, and for the first time since entering this nightmare universe, his mind felt clear, perfectly, terribly clear. "Welcome to Purgatory," a voice said, Imperium style. Rick turned and saw the Inquisitor, still in broken armor but somehow complete, as if the concept of the Inquisitor had been preserved even after the flesh failed. Its skull helmet was gone, revealing a face that had been human maybe 3 centuries ago but was now mostly scar tissue and augmentation scars. Old beyond reckoning, tired beyond description, but still carrying that absolute certainty that had defined it in life. "You're dead, heretic, killed by your own weapon attempting to undo your own corruption. The Imperium's records will list you as a demonic incursion terminated with extreme prejudice. Very tidy, very final." Rick laughed, a sound like broken glass in a blender. "So this is the afterlife, standing around with some religious fanatic in a dimension that forgot to finish loading. I've been to better hells. At least the screaming ones had interior design." He looked around at the non-space surrounding them, at the layers of reality visible through transparent nothing. "What is this place? Some kind of holding cell for souls? Purgatory implies eventual redemption, and I'm guessing your corpse god isn't big on second chances." The Inquisitor moved closer, boots making no sound on ground that might not exist. "This is where the Emperor sorts the dead, judges their worth, decides if they served faithfully enough to deserve the peace of oblivion, or if they still have use." It gestured at itself, at the armor that wouldn't stay broken, at the certainty that wouldn't stay shattered. "I've been here before, died 17 times in his service, 17 times judged and found wanting. Each time he sends me back more machine than man, more tool than soldier.
I stopped being a person around death number 8. Now I'm just a function, a religious subroutine executing orders until the heat death of reality. Rick felt cold that had nothing to do with temperature. You're saying your emperor recycles his soldiers, turns them into infinite respawn slaves. He thought about the implications: an empire running on literally eternal conscription, where death wasn't release but reassignment, where faithful service meant you never got to stop serving. That's actually genius in the most horrifying possible way. No wonder you people are so fanatically devoted. You can't escape even by dying, and neither can you. The Inquisitor's voice carried something that might have been pity if it remembered how to feel pity. You're interesting, heretic. You opened a warp breach, communed with daemons, built heretical machines, and then destroyed them all before they could spread. You sinned and repented in the same breath. The Emperor has use for minds like yours, brilliant, dangerous, capable of innovation, but finally willing to destroy that innovation when necessary. You'll serve, you'll be rebuilt, augmented, your genius weaponized for the Imperium's eternal war, and you'll die again, and be rebuilt again, and serve again forever, until the galaxy burns out and the last human screams into void. Rick looked at his hands, solid but not real, present but not material, looked at the layers of reality around him, at patterns he was finally beginning to understand. The Emperor wasn't a god, not really. It was a battery, a psychic capacitor made from a human who'd lived 10,000 years beyond death, sustained by the sacrifice of thousands of souls daily, maintaining the Imperium not through divine will but through the sheer accumulated weight of suffering compressed into purpose. And that purpose was simple: survive, not thrive, not improve, not evolve, just survive. Keep humanity existing one more day, one more year, one more millennium, no matter the cost in sanity or innovation or individual souls. No, Rick said it quietly, but the word echoed through layers of reality like a stone thrown into still water. No, I don't think I will. He'd spent infinite lifetimes refusing to be part of systems, refusing to serve anyone's purpose but his own, had destroyed governments and overthrown dimensions and told gods to fuck off with casual regularity. And this corpse emperor, this 10,000-year-old battery pretending to be divine, thought it could conscript him, thought it could turn Rick Sanchez into a servitor with delusions of free will. The Inquisitor actually laughed, a sound like rust scraping rust. You think you have a choice? You're dead, heretic. Your consciousness exists only because he permits it. Your thoughts continue only because he hasn't decided to erase them. You have no portal gun, no technology, no way out. You're not in a dimension you can escape. You're in the afterlife of a totalitarian theocracy. And even death isn't free here. It reached for Rick, gauntleted hand moving to grip his shoulder in what might have been meant as comfort or threat. Accept it, serve, at least then your genius means something instead of just ending. Rick looked at the hand, at the Inquisitor's face behind its certainty, at the layers of reality surrounding them like prison walls made of possibility, and he smiled, really smiled, the expression that had preceded his worst ideas across infinite universes. You're right about one thing. I can't escape through normal means, can't build a portal gun out of nothing, can't science my way through a metaphysical cage. His smile widened. But you know what I can do, what I've always been able to do. He reached toward the transparent ground, toward the visible layers of reality stacked like cards, and his fingers found the edge of one, found where the material universe met the immaterium, where physics became negotiable. I can find the seams, the places where systems break, the bugs in reality's code. The Inquisitor's hand closed around empty air. Rick was already falling, diving between layers of existence like a man swimming between dimensions, following the mathematics of the vortex backward through probability, and into something worse than the warp, worse than death, worse than eternal service. He was going somewhere the Emperor couldn't follow, into the spaces between spaces where even gods forgot to look. And as he fell through screaming geometry and crystallized time, Rick Sanchez had one final coherent thought before consciousness became optional. If he was going to be trapped in hell, it would be a hell of his own making, not theirs, never theirs. Rick landed in darkness, true darkness, not the absence of light but the presence of nothing, a void so complete it made the concept of emptiness seem cluttered. He gasped unnecessary without lungs, but habit died hard, and found himself solid again, consciousness compressed back into something approximating a body. He was standing on ground that felt like obsidian but gave slightly under his weight, like reality here was still making up its mind about basic properties. Above him, if above meant anything in this place, was not sky but absence, not black, not void, but the color that existed before color was invented, before light learned how to be light. Slowly, shapes emerged, not because his eyes adjusted but because the darkness grew curious, decided to let him see what he'd fallen into. Structures rose around him, buildings maybe, or the memory of buildings, architecture that had forgotten what it was supposed to be, towers of crystallized despair, bridges made from broken equations, streets paved with compressed time, and everywhere scattered like autumn leaves were machines, dead machines, ancient machines, technology so far beyond the Imperium's understanding that even their holiest relics looked like children's toys in comparison. This wasn't just Dark Age tech. This was something older, something from before humanity had learned to be afraid of its own intelligence.
Rick moved forward, each step echoing in ways that sound shouldn't echo, and his scientific mind finally understood where he was. This was the place where innovation went to die, where every genius who'd escaped the Emperor's judgment ended up, every scientist who'd refused eternal service, every engineer who'd chosen oblivion over conscription. This was exile-made geography, the universe's junk drawer for brilliant minds that wouldn't submit. And judging by the technology scattered around him like monuments to forgotten ambition, he wasn't the first to arrive, wasn't even the 100th. This place had been collecting refugees from divine judgment for millennia. A light appeared in the darkness, not bright, a dim phosphorescence like bioluminescence from deep-sea creatures that had never seen the sun. It moved toward him with purpose, and as it got closer, Rick saw it was being carried by something human-shaped but wrong in ways that made his reconstituted brain ache. The figure wore robes that had been white maybe 10,000 years ago but were now the color of old bone, and its face was hidden behind a mask of bronze and silver that showed no expression but somehow radiated exhaustion. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, like the darkness itself had learned language. "Another refugee from the corpse god's justice," the figure said, not unkindly. "Another mind too brilliant to be allowed peace, too stubborn to accept service. Welcome to the hollow, stranger. Welcome to the place where even the Emperor's light doesn't reach, because we built walls from our own absence, sealed ourselves away from his gaze using the one thing he cannot tolerate: deliberate obscurity." The figure gestured at the dead machines around them. "We are the forgotten innovators, the scientists who escaped the cycle, the engineers who chose exile over resurrection, and you." It studied Rick with hidden eyes that somehow saw everything. "You reek of dimensional displacement. You're not even from this reality, are you?" Rick found his voice surprised it still worked. "Earth Dimension C-137, originally. Been hopping around the multiverse for longer than I remember. Stumbled into your grim dark nightmare by accident. Opened a warp breach, created an evil thought daemon version of myself, and then blew myself up to stop my own genius from metastasizing. Typical Tuesday." He looked at the figure, at the robes and mask and the technology scattered like grave markers. "You're telling me there's a whole community of exiled scientists hiding in the dimensional equivalent of a broom closet? That's either the saddest thing I've ever heard or the most hopeful, and I genuinely can't tell which." The figure nodded slowly, a gesture that seemed to take effort, as if moving required negotiating with the darkness first. "We number in the thousands now. Every mind brilliant enough to catch the Emperor's attention but strong enough to refuse his purpose. We fled here over millennia, one by one, building this refuge from paradox and desperation. The hollow exists in the gap between the materium and the immaterium, sustained by our collective choice to be forgotten. As long as we create nothing that affects the outside universe, as long as we remain perfectly irrelevant, he cannot find us, cannot drag us back to serve." The exhaustion in that voice could have crushed planets. "It is freedom, at the cost of mattering." Rick looked around at the dead machines again, understanding clicking into place with horrible clarity. All this technology, weapons that could crack planets, engines that could rewrite physics, devices that made his portal gun look like a calculator, all of it unused, built by brilliant minds with infinite time and nothing to do except create, and then abandoned because using any of it would attract attention, would ripple back into the material universe, and alert the Emperor to their location. They were scientists in a laboratory they could never leave, building experiments they could never activate, answering questions no one would ever hear. It was immortal genius rendered completely, perfectly meaningless. "How long?" Rick asked. "How long have you been here?" The figure didn't answer immediately. When it did, the voice carried weight that made Rick's reconstituted bones ache. "I was Archmagos Viridia Cole. I designed the first Titan, the actual first one before the Mechanicus rewrote history and claimed the machine god whispered the blueprints. That was 11,000 years ago. Give or take a few centuries, time doesn't move consistently here.
We measure it in creations instead of rotations. I've built 17,000 machines in exile, haven't activated a single one. The silence that followed was absolute. Rick stood in the darkness surrounded by millennia of trapped genius, by technology that would never be used, by minds that had chosen irrelevance over slavery, and were now slowly going mad from the lack of consequence. He thought about his own life, the infinite adventures, the constant innovation, the way he'd used intelligence as a weapon and a shield and a middle finger to causality itself. Everything he was depended on his genius mattering, on his innovations affecting reality, on being able to build something and watch it work, watch it change things, watch it prove he was the smartest man in whatever room or universe he occupied. And here in the Hollow none of that was possible. Here, genius was a prison sentence, knowledge was a curse, understanding was punishment. Build anything that mattered and the Emperor would find you, drag you back to the cycle of eternal service. So you built things that didn't matter, or you went mad. Or Rick looked at the figure in ancient robes standing perfectly still in the darkness. You forgot what mattering meant and just existed, a ghost of brilliance haunting the ruins of your own potential. It was the most perfectly horrible fate Rick could imagine. And the worst part was understanding that he'd chosen it, had dove into this exile voluntarily because even this was better than serving. So what happens now? Rick asked, and hated how small his voice sounded in the absolute darkness. I just stay here, build things forever that don't do anything, slowly go insane from intellectual blue balls until I'm just another ghost wandering around dead machines. Viridia Cole tilted its masked head, considering. Or you do what some of us eventually do, what I should have done centuries ago but lacked the courage for. It gestured at the darkness itself, at the void beyond the dead machines. You walk into the deep hollow, the part of exile that goes further than exile, where even consciousness becomes optional, where you stop being anything at all, true oblivion. The final innovation, deliberately unmaking yourself so completely that not even the Emperor could reassemble what's left. Rick looked toward where the figure pointed, though there was nothing to see except darkness becoming more absolute, more final. And for the first time since arriving in this nightmare universe, Rick Sanchez felt something that wasn't curiosity or anger, or stubborn defiance. He felt tired, so profoundly, infinitely tired. Tired of being smart, tired of seeing patterns and solving problems, and understanding things that would drive other minds to gibbering madness. Tired of being interesting. The deep hollow promised rest, real rest, the kind that came from stopping, from choosing not to be, from finally, after everything just being done. And Rick realized with crystal horror that he was considering it, was actually genuinely thinking about walking into that absolute darkness and letting go, letting genius and consciousness and the exhausting burden of being Rick fucking Sanchez dissolve into perfectly irrelevant nothing. Rick took one step toward the deep hollow, then stopped. His foot hovered over darkness that was darker than dark, over the threshold where consciousness went to stop being conscious, and something in him rebelled. Not the genius part, that part was exhausted, ready to quit, done with the infinite weight of understanding. It was something smaller, something he'd almost forgotten he still had after decades of nihilism and alcohol and treating existence like a joke without a punchline. It was spite, pure, distilled, weaponized spite at the idea that this universe thought it had beaten him, that the Emperor's totalitarian nightmare had successfully trapped the smartest man in infinite realities by giving him two choices: serve forever or matter never. Fuck that, Rick said aloud and pulled his foot back from oblivion. Q turned to face Viridia Cole, the ancient archmagos who'd been dying slowly for 11 millennia, and smiled. The smile that preceded his worst ideas, the smile that had made gods nervous across dimensions. You said you've built 17,000 machines here. Haven't activated a single one because it would attract his attention, right? Viridia nodded slowly, uncertain where this was going but recognizing dangerous curiosity when it heard it. What if that's not a problem? What if that's the solution? The Archmagos tilted its masked head. You want to activate the machines? Draw the Emperor's gaze directly here. That's suicide. Worse than suicide, that's conscription. He'll drag every soul in the hollow back to serve. We'll turn this refuge into another factory for eternal war. You doom us all for what? A moment of relevance before being enslaved. The exhaustion in its voice had been replaced with something sharper. Fear, maybe, or the memory of fear from when it still remembered how to feel things. Rick's smile widened. No, I want to activate all of them, simultaneously. Every machine, every weapon, every device, every genius has built here over the last 11,000 years, all powered up at once. Not to fight the Emperor can't fight something that runs on the psychic weight of a quadrillion human souls, but we can overload him, flood his senses with so much innovation, so much raw technological advancement, all manifesting at once, that his attention fragments, breaks, and in that moment of divine distraction, Rick gestured at the darkness surrounding them, at the walls built from deliberate obscurity. We tear down these walls, stop hiding, make the hollow visible to the entire galaxy.
Silence. Absolute, crushing silence as Viridia processed what Rick was suggesting. When it spoke again, the voice shook, not with age but with something that might have been hope if hope hadn't been beaten out of it centuries ago. You want to advertise our existence? Tell the Imperium there's a dimension full of unsanctioned innovation. They'll declare exterminate us on reality itself. They'll tear apart the boundaries between materium and immaterium, trying to purge us. It's madness. The Archmagos paused. Or it's brilliant. I can't tell which. Possibly both. Definitely both. Rick agreed, already moving, already thinking, already doing what he did best. Turning impossible situations into opportunities for catastrophically creative solutions. Think about it. The Emperor maintains control through ignorance, keeps humanity stupid and faithful because smart humans ask questions and questions open doors to the warp. But what if there was a place where humans could innovate safely? Where consciousness could think dangerous thoughts but couldn't attract daemons because the thoughts were insulated by dimensional barriers. You've already built those barriers, you've been hiding behind them for millennia. We just need to weaponize the hiding, turn the hollow from a prison into a laboratory. Make it matter. Viridia stood motionless for a long moment, and Rick could almost hear the gears turning in its ancient augmented mind, hear it calculating probabilities, weighing risks against rewards, considering possibilities it had deliberately stopped considering 11,000 years ago because hope was too painful when trapped in eternity. The Emperor would never allow it. Would spend 1,000,000 worlds worth of soldiers trying to destroy this place rather than admit innovation could exist outside his control. But the Archmagus was already reaching for the nearest dead machine, fingers trembling with something that might have been excitement, which means we'd need to make ourselves indispensable, build something. He needs more than he needs humanity to stay ignorant. Rick snapped his fingers, pointing at Viridia like a teacher whose student had just answered correctly. Exactly. We become the Imperium's secret R&D department, the place where innovation happens but can't escape and corrupt the faithful masses. We solve their impossible problems, build better weapons, design more efficient engines, answer the questions that would normally attract chaos, and in return they leave us alone. They let us matter. He looked around at the thousands of dead machines, at millennia of trapped genius waiting to be activated. It's not freedom, not really, but it's better than irrelevance, better than serving on the front lines for eternity. It's being useful on our own terms. The other figures had begun to appear from the darkness, drawn by voices, by conversation, by the first sign of purpose in centuries or millennia. They emerged like ghosts made solid, wearing robes from a dozen different eras. Reverence, but from the sheer psychic pressure of being perceived by something that thought in terms of species rather than individuals. Rick stayed standing, barely. His knees shook and his reconstituted body wanted desperately to collapse under the weight of attention from a being that treated galaxies like chess pieces. But he'd stared down entities before, cosmic horrors and multiversal bureaucrats and things that called themselves gods but were really just very old and very angry. This was the same thing, just bigger, just more concentrated, just more tired. Because Rick said, and was proud, his voice only cracked once.
You need us more than we need oblivion. We both know it. Silence.
Not the absence of sound, but the presence of evaluation. The Emperor's psychic projection studied Rick with intensity that felt like being dissected at the quantum level, reading every thought and memory and dimensional displacement that made him foreign to this reality.
You are not of this universe. You are contamination.
A thought virus from outside creation.
I should erase you from existence for the crime of arriving.
Pause that contained entire civilizations worth of calculation. Yet you destroyed your own innovation when it threatened to spread, chose martyrdom over corruption. This suggests restraint, a quality rare
enough to be valuable.
Rick took a step forward, ignoring the way reality bent around the Emperor's presence like gravity around a black hole.
Here's what I know about you, corpse god.
You've been sitting on that throne for 10,000 years, sacrificing 1,000 psychers daily just to keep the astronomic and lit, maintaining an empire that's been slowly losing ground to chaos and Xenos and its own stupidity. You banned innovation because innovation led to the warp, which makes sense. I've seen how consciousness and creation attract daemons here. But you created a different problem. You made humanity so stupid, so locked into dogma that they're losing. slowly but definitely losing. Another 10,000 years and the Imperium will be nothing but prayer and rust. The pressure increased, threatening to compress Rick into component particles. You presume to lecture me on the management of my species. You who opened a warp breach through mere curiosity. You who created demonic reflections of your own intellect. The Emperor's voice carried something that might have been anger if gods bothered with emotions that simple. Innovation is heresy. Heresy is extinction. I have watched humanity nearly destroy itself twice through unchecked advancement. Better to stagnate than evolve into food for the dark gods. Rick gestured at the activated machines around them, at Viridia and the other forgotten innovators still kneeling but listening at the technology that represented 11,000 years of progress that could have changed everything. But what if there was a middle way? What if innovation happened here in the hollow, insulated from the warp by dimensional barriers that your exiles built specifically to hide from you? We become your secret laboratory, the place where impossible problems get solved without attracting chaos. You give us the questions, we give you the answers, and nobody in the Imperium proper needs to know where the new tech comes from. You can even claim it's divinely inspired. Make up some story about the Messiah or whatever keeps your faithful happy. The Emperor's presence shifted, not retreating but recalculating. For the first time since manifesting, he seemed uncertain. You offer to serve, after fleeing to exile specifically to avoid service. Why would I trust this sudden change? Rick smiled, bitter and knowing. Because it's not service, it's negotiation. We're not soldiers in your eternal war. We're contractors. We don't worship you, don't believe in your divinity, don't pretend that your 40,000-year-old corpse is somehow holy. We just recognize that you have resources we need to matter, and we have knowledge you need to survive. It's a transaction. Clean. Professional. No faith required. Something changed in the Emperor's psychic presence. A shift that Rick couldn't quite name but felt fundamentally important. When he spoke again, the voice was quieter, still absolute, still carrying the weight of divine authority, but underneath it exhaustion. Profound, bone-deep exhaustion that came from maintaining civilization through willpower alone for 10 millennia without rest or relief. You understand. Finally, after 10,000 years, a human mind looks at me and sees not God but function, not divinity but desperate necessity. A pause. I never wanted to be worshipped. Wanted to elevate humanity through reason and science. Wanted to kill the gods, not become one. But faith was the only tool strong enough to hold humanity together after the heresy broke us. Rick felt something unexpected twist in his chest. Not sympathy, he'd lost the ability to properly sympathize with anyone decades ago, but recognition. Understanding that he was talking to something that had been smart enough to see the trap it was building and not smart enough to avoid it, had watched its own plans curdle into theocracy, had been forced to become the god it had fought to destroy, had spent 10,000 years being worshipped by a species it had wanted to free. The Emperor wasn't a tyrant, he was a failure. The smartest human who'd ever lived, brought low by the exact thing Rick feared most, good intentions calcifying into horror. So here's the deal, Rick said, and his voice was softer now, stripped of sarcasm. We stay here in the hollow, we innovate. We solve your problems, we make humanity smarter without making them chaos bait.
and in return you let us matter. You stopped trying to conscript us for eternal service. You let genius be genius instead of forcing it into servitude or suicide. He looked at Viridia, at the ancient Archmagos who'd removed its mask, at the other scientists emerging from millennia of purposeful obscurity. We're not asking for freedom, just asking not to be slaves. There's a difference. The Emperor's presence filled the hollow, and Rick realized he was considering it, actually weighing the proposal against 10,000 years of established doctrine and discovering that doctrine had blind spots. This hollow would become a sanctioned heresy, innovation permitted only because it occurs outside Imperial space, knowledge generated but carefully controlled. It is pragmatic, dangerous, possibly necessary. A longer pause. I accept, but know this: if even one technology from this place attracts demonic attention, if even one innovation leads to corruption, I will destroy this refuge and everyone within it. No warnings, no mercy. Utility ends where survival begins. Rick nodded, feeling the weight of that threat like physics, remembering how to work fair. We fuck up, we die. Clean terms. He looked around at the forgotten innovators, at faces showing expressions ranging from hope to terror to something that might have been relief after 11,000 years of hiding. So what happens now? You give us a problem to solve. Some impossible engineering challenge to prove we're worth keeping around. The Emperor's presence began to fade, retreating back through layers of reality toward the Golden Throne, where a body had been dying for 10 millennia without being allowed to finish. But before he disappeared completely, one final message: find a way to kill a Chaos God. Then we will discuss your value. And then he was gone, and the hollow was just darkness and machines again, except now the darkness felt different. Not like a prison but like a workshop. Not like a grave but like a laboratory with terrible, dangerous purpose. Rick collapsed, the psychic pressure finally lifting, and lay on obsidian that wasn't obsidian while his mind processed what had just happened. He'd negotiated with a god, had offered complicity in exchange for relevance, had traded exile for conditional freedom and called it a win. And the worst part was knowing he'd do it again. Would make the same choice every time, because mattering even in compromise, even in collaboration with tyranny, was better than dissolving into nothing. Viridia knelt beside him, ancient and exhausted and somehow more alive than it had been in centuries. You realize what you've done, what you've committed us to. We're part of the Imperium now. Not citizens, not soldiers, but tools. Sanctioned heresy. Rick laughed, tasting something like blood in his mouth, even though he didn't technically have a mouth in this dimensional space. Welcome to the real world, where every choice is garbage and you pick the one that lets you sleep at night, or in your case the one that lets you matter after 11,000 years of hiding. He sat up slowly, looking at the machine still running, still humming with power and purpose. Besides, he asked us to kill a Chaos God. That's not a request, that's a challenge. And I haven't had a good challenge in years. The other innovators gathered around them, and for the first time in millennia they began to work. Not alone, not in isolation, not building things they'd never activate. They worked together, combining knowledge from different eras and different specializations, building toward an impossible goal with the understanding that failure meant extinction but trying meant they mattered. Rick stood among them, refugee from another dimension, accidental heretic, the smartest man who'd ever told a god to go fuck himself, and then immediately negotiated a contract and felt something he hadn't felt since arriving in this nightmare universe. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just the grim recognition that he'd found his place in a reality that had no place for people like him, and somewhere impossibly distant on a throne made of gold and suffering, the Emperor watched through dying eyes and calculated whether this gamble would save humanity or doom it, whether these brilliant minds could actually solve the unsolvable, or if they'd just become another variable in an equation that had been running for 10,000 years without reaching any conclusion except more war, more sacrifice, more faith, grinding souls into fuel for an empire that couldn't remember why it had been worth building. The answer would come eventually. Everything did, given enough time. But for now, in the hollow, in the space between spaces where even gods forgot to look, genius was finally allowed to matter again, even if mattering came at the cost of complicity, even if freedom was just a different kind of cage, even if the only way to win was to compromise with the very system you'd fled. Rick Sanchez had learned what this universe had been trying to teach him since he'd stepped onto that ash-covered battlefield in the grim darkness of the far future. There is no escape, no clean victories, no pure choices, just survival purchased at whatever cost consciousness could bear. And if you were smart enough, if you were stubborn enough, if you were spiteful enough to refuse the easy deaths, you survived long enough to make that cost mean something, to turn collaboration into negotiation, to transform defeat into the ugliest, most practical version of victory that reality would permit. The machines hummed, the darkness listened, and Rick began to work on killing a god, because what else was there to do? The portal gun was gone, the escape was closed, but the problems remained, and problems were what he was good at, even when solving them meant becoming part of what he'd spent infinite lifetimes opposing, even when genius became just another tool in an empire's arsenal. Even when the smartest man in the multiverse discovered that intelligence alone couldn't save you from a universe that ran on faith and sacrifice and the slow grinding extinction of hope, but it could make you interesting. And in the end, being interesting was all Rick had ever really wanted, even if interesting meant dangerous, even if it meant complicit. Even if it meant trapped in a hell of his own making, building weapons for a corpse god while pretending it was a choice, because the alternative was oblivion. And Rick Sanchez, despite everything, despite all evidence that nothing mattered and consciousness was a cosmic joke, still wasn't quite ready to stop being conscious. Not yet. Not while there were still gods to kill and problems to solve and terrible ideas to turn into terrible reality. The hollow filled with light from activated machines, and in that light for just a moment exile looked almost like purpose. If you made it this far, you've seen what happens when infinite genius meets finite faith. When science faces the warp and learns that some questions cost more to answer than ignorance cost to maintain. Drop a comment: could Rick actually kill a chaos god? Or did he just sign himself up for eternal damnation with a contract instead of a prayer? Because in Warhammer 40k, the smartest man in the multiverse is just another tool in the Emperor's hand. And tools don't get to choose their purpose, they just get to choose whether they break quietly or make noise on the way down.